All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Diane Hessen, board member of NACD New England Chapter, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our virtual program, The Board's Future is Here. Adapt, Anticipate, and Accelerate. So, first, we have a couple of housekeeping items. One, a reminder to remain muted throughout the program and use the chat function to pose questions. No need to wait for the Q&A portion of the event to submit questions. If you regularly come to our programs, you know we're going to monitor the chat box during the panel discussion and intersperse your questions as they come up. Secondly, we know that many of you want to receive credits for this program. To receive that, we need to know your first and last name, so make sure, please, that that's visible on your Zoom window. And finally, I need to make the announcement that NACD and the NACD chapter network organizations are nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations dedicated to providing directors with the opportunity to discuss timely governance oversight practices. The views of the speakers and audience are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of NACD. Okay, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our chapter sponsors. The continued loyalty of these organizations underscores the important role of NACD. It is their
Okay.
support that allows us to
Have
fulfill
used
our
my
mission
light
of
so long I can't
delivering
remember how to
world-class, director-centric local
add
programming.
the.
Somebody,
Oh, here it is over here.
oh, we got somebody who's not on mute. All right, I'll keep going here. Yeah, it is I want to make sure you hear this. So these sponsors, it is their support that allows us to fulfill our mission of delivering world-class, director-centric local programming and peer-to-peer sharing of insights that is vital to advancing excellence in the boardroom. Today, we are highlighting a special spotlight sponsor, BDO, who has continued to support our mission of excellent corporate governance. BDO, Amy, and team, just thank you so much for all your support. Next, I want to welcome our first time attendees here with us today. Thank you for joining us. We truly hope you'll enjoy your first program, and we hope to see you at many more. And finally, I just want to thank a few key people at NACD New England who were instrumental in coordinating today's event. Ellen Richstone, board member and programming chair, Deb Rosenthal, executive director, and Larissa Lovetto, chapter administrator. Thank you for all your efforts bringing this program to our members. And a very special thank you to two individuals whose exceptional work on the Governing for the Future survey made this program possible. Thank you to Steve Ford and Amy Rojic for their tremendous time, dedication, and hard work. And speaking of Amy Rojic, now it is my pleasure to introduce Amy, who is our moderator. Amy is the National Managing Principal Corporate Governance and leader of BDO's Center for Corporate Governance, and she serves on the board for the Association of Audit Committee Members, Inc. I will now turn the program over to Amy.
Well, thank you, Diane. And I am a longtime fan of NACD, and I've been working with Ellen and company on the curriculum committee for many years now. And I'm really happy to be here and excited to moderate this discussion because it was of special interest to me. So, more about those who are with me today, though. Emily Nagel Green. Emily serves as an independent board director of Casella Waste Management Systems and Casella Waste Systems, Inc. I got the old name, I believe, and as a trustee of Center Space. Her nonprofit work includes Up Education Network and Boston's Agents of Change Summit, and she is a lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management. Ron O'Hanley is the chairman and CEO for State Street and serves on the boards of Unum Corp, ABL Space Systems, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and Beth Israel Lahey Health. He also serves on several industry and nonprofit boards, including the Institute of International Finance, U.S. Kuwait Business Council, Massachusetts Competitive Partnership, Syracuse University, Naval War College Foundation, the IYRS School of Technology and Trades, Ireland Funds, FIFA Boston 26, yes, and WBUR. And last but not least, we have Marna Whittington serving as an independent board director of Oaktree Capital Holdings LLC, Brookfield Oaktree Holdings LLC, and Phillips 66. And her nonprofit boards include the Salt Institute and the American Philosophical Society. So thank you all for your time and being here with us today to share your thoughts on what governing for the future is going to look like. Okay, so Larissa, if you don't mind bringing up our first slide. In 2025, the NACD New England Chapter's Curriculum Subcommittee, which include members for the Governing for the Future, created a member survey that focused on directors' viewpoints on how the board's composition, structure, and processes need to evolve for boards to remain effective in addressing the rapid pace of change of both risk and opportunities impacting businesses in the near and longer term. Over 100 responded and represent a mix of directors serving across public, 38%, private, 59%, and nonprofit, 63%. And obviously, many serve on multiple types of boards, which is the skew in those numbers. So the bottom line from this survey is that directors across each of these three types of boards are facing the same forces: accelerating complexity, disruptive technologies, shifting stakeholder expectations, and increasing accountability. The survey's message is unequivocal. Future-ready boards must evolve now through composition, capability, structure, and process to meet the moment and lead with credibility. So what you're seeing on your slide here is essentially 5 key themes that have emerged. And so what I'd like to do just to kick us off is ask each of our presenters, do the themes from our survey reflected on the slide resonate with you? And is there one that really hits home? And Ron, I'll begin with you. Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Amy, and thanks to everybody that's attending. This is a really important forum for us and a really important topic. I think what stood out for me in reading the materials and the slide itself, I think illustrates the point that board effectiveness really is about an integrated system. So at some level, all of them are important and they all work together. I do think, though, that if you have to pick out one, it's this idea of the first one, that board composition, meaning who's on the board, its structure, and skills is probably foundational here. And I mean, in some ways, it's trite to say that a board is only as good as its component pieces. But as we enter this period of change, and it's not to say that past periods haven't been periods of change, but that what the composition of the board looks like and how you transform that, recognizing it's very easy for us sitting here in a workshop to just say, got to do it. But boards have ongoing roles, and they've got a governance role. They can't just park for a year or 6 months and say, well, let's transform ourselves. So saying it is a whole lot easier than doing it. So that does stand out for us. And again, every board is different, and it's in some ways that sounds a little bit like a cop-out, but it's true, depending on where. And right now, I'm referring mostly to the for-profit public company boards at this point. We can talk about other boards. It really does depend on where it is in its cycle, what it's facing, what the regulatory environment is, et cetera, et cetera. But a mindful thinking about how are we going to transform this board? What's the objectives of it? I mean, in some ways, transformation of a board is no different than transformation of a firm. What are we trying to achieve and why? What will finished look like? If we're ever finished, and that's the challenge with these things, right? We'll get to quote finished, and then something new will be facing us. But knowing what we know now, where are we now, and what are we trying to get to? So I think for me, the one that stood out the most was the first. But I can't emphasize enough, and I assume that's going to come up in the conversation, that there is no such thing as a silver bullet here, that just doing one of these is going to get it done. Effectiveness is a complicated topic. It's complicated to achieve it. And I thought these themes actually together represented an important system around what board effectiveness is.
Yeah, very well said. I think that's the challenge in looking at just one of these. So maybe Marna, I'll go to you in terms of what your thoughts are on the themes that have emerged and if there's anything that really resonated specifically with you.
Well, as I looked at all five of the themes, the descriptor that you put on them, increasing accountability, really resonated for me across all the functions of a publicly traded board. And a good example is the audit committee. Originally, this was basically a backward-looking committee that cared about Qs and Ks and earnings releases and hiring and firing the external auditor. A few years later, they added risk management and creation of the risk heat map and mitigation of risk. And then more recently, cybersecurity. And now in the last year or two on my audit committees, I see responsibility for governance of AI and use of AI in the company coming up. And this is at a time when our external auditors haven't even figured out what they're going to audit. So if you just look at this one example and put it across your five themes, we've had huge increase in accountability and complexity, which you also mentioned. And the time is mushrooming that we give to board work, but it never seems to be quite enough.
Good. Yeah, that's true. And I think, Ron, you also alluded to the point that we're always in a time of change. You can always say there's no certainty either, but I think the combination with the complexity of how things are moving and the speed at which things are moving are really compounding the role of the board today and the responsibilities and accountability. So Emily, wanted to get your thoughts on this question.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me in this august group. I'm quite intimidated. I thought the study was really well done, by the way, and I think it adds a great amount of value for NACD members. So thank you for what you did to give that to us. I thought the accelerating complexity and the need for specialists in the boardroom was the thing that jumped out to me. It may be because I'm in the middle of two simultaneous board searches right now, so I am obsessed with what are the skills we really need and what will we have to forego in order to get those, because it's all about trade-offs, right? And so that's the one that really spoke to me, but I thought they were all spot on.
Okay, well, thank you. And that was the softball question. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. So Larissa, if you don't mind putting up the next slide. We've broken down the following discussion into findings around evolution of board composition and refreshment, structure, and governance processes. So attendees, just a reminder, please do submit your questions via the chat, and we can pause to address them at the end of each section. So with that, directors indicated that there is likely improvement to be made in enhancing composition of the board, as only 22% indicate that the current composition of their boards is very well poised to take on emerging risk and opportunity. We also asked, and Larissa, if you want to advance to the next slide, about how increasing expectations regarding directors' specialization may be impacting future board recruitment of generalists. And for those with sharp eyes, the IE on that slide should be versus. So thinking about all of that, Emily, I'm going to start with you and specifically about the specialist seat. I just wanted to say the survey indicates that directors would choose a specialist over a generalist for the next seat to add the most functional value in the next 1 to 2 years. And that was a 69% to 31%. And Ellen will kill me if I don't point out that the answer to this question may be somewhat skewed in that the majority of boards today likely already have representation, I will say, from a generalist perspective, and think about, the traditional CEO strategists that comprise the board, former CFOs, and all of the directors are expecting or should have financial literacy of the organization. So we kind of start there. So I think the increase, and as Marna was pointing out earlier, some of the really significant matters that are impacting all boards, no matter what industry, whether you're private, public or not for profit, that are really impacting all boards similarly. So, Emily, in your experience chairing the nomination and governance committees, how do you think about director selection? What specialist profiles have truly moved the needle on your boards? And what ways have you perhaps seen boards both expand and miss opportunities in their board refreshment?
Yeah, yeah. Well, this was why I picked the priority of the themes that I did. This I have seen a tremendous amount of change. I'm sure we all have. I've been on boards now for 10 or 12 years, and it definitely was we need a sitting or recent CFO or CEO, and that's table stakes for the board. But I think we're now starting to realize that some of these issues are coming into the boardroom before we're even ready. We look around the table and see we don't really have a lot of value to add in this group to what management's wrestling with. So starting with a skills matrix where we revisit what are the columns in the skills matrix? What is it that we need to bring into the board? And a decision around that, which needs to be made in concert with management. What does management think it needs to have over the next 3 to 5 years? And what do we as a board feel we lack in supporting them? Has opened up a tremendous appetite for specialist roles. And as I mentioned, I'm doing a couple of searches right now, and we're in the middle of struggling between how do we get this additional expertise that we want. One thing I have to say, gratuitous observation, I think it's a great thing because it's opening up board service opportunities for some tremendous talents that might not have been able to get a shot at that otherwise. I don't think it's enough for them to say, hey, I'm a chief HR officer, therefore I can help you with your human capital issues. There's a lot of other criteria that are important in choosing a specialist. You've got to have the board exposure, the gravitas, the ability to collaborate with us and to speak truth to the management team. But one of my recent appointments was designed to help us deal with ESG and corporate social responsibility issues. We had nobody on the board who had built ESG programs, and we brought on someone who could bring all of that to us. And they would not have fit the bill for the CEO, CFO standard bill of fare, but they brought that specialist expertise. And I think hands down, it was a great addition to that board. Everybody on that board would agree. And right now I'm in the middle of a search where one of the things that we're talking about is cybersecurity, digital transformation, and AI. Can one person bring current expertise in those areas to us or not? We'll find out. I'm going, the resumes are on my desk.
Yeah, everyone's probably hanging on the success you have with that, right? That's
Cross your
probably
fingers for me.
one of the top discussions we have all the time.
Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
anecdotally, well, you can't separate digital and cyber at this point. So
No,
you
no.
have to think about it kind of holistically as a holistic package of risk and opportunity.
I think the good news is in both the boards I'm involved with at the moment, everybody at the table is now over the issue of whether or not we need specialized expertise, and everybody agrees. And really what we're just involved with now is the tough discussion about the trade-offs. We have one seat available right now. What's the most important thing? And we're going to have another seat maybe next year. How do we stage the expertise that we bring in? That's the tough prioritization.
Yeah. Well, Marna, I'd love to hear your perception as to how you perhaps see dispersion in this area among the public, private, and nonprofit boards.
Well, first, I think I'm a bit of a contrarian here. Like Emily, I like to start with a skills matrix, but I like to have several people in each of those competency buckets, and I like each person to have several of those competencies. I don't really agree most of the time with recruiting a specialist because you don't want to delegate the expertise for the board to one person and let everybody else off the hook. And you don't know whether that person's going to be a specialist in 5 years. If you need specialist and specialist advice, I would suggest you go out and hire it for the board for the question on the table. Maybe even Amy, like BDO. I think you guys do it.
I did not ask her to do that.
No, but you guys do a lot of that stuff for boards. And
Sure do.
if I were in a difficult situation, such as an activist on the doorstep, I don't care whether I have an AI specialist or one. I want a board full of very seasoned people, lots of C-suite experience, I want them to be smart. I want them to know which questions to ask. I want them to have appropriate temperaments. And just a wide range of experiences, and go out and hire your communications expert, your investment banking expert, your legal expert. So that's kind of where I come down. I'd rather have a good, strong board of generalists that fill a number of my competency buckets and relying particularly in this day and age. And I do a lot of board education. I think you want people that are continually learners. In case of dispersion, I would just say two things. First, in your not-for-profit boards, you end up being overweighted to donors or people that hope will be donors and don't often have a lot of governance experience. So that's a whole different kind of challenge. And in the private company boards I've served on, tend to be overweight to founders or family of founders or initial investors, which again creates a very different kind of challenge.
Mhm. No, that well said. And one of I'd love to get your thoughts on this because I thought it was such a valuable discussion point. Recently, at an aspiring directors program with one of our beloved NACD members, Roberta Sidney, and she gave the example of the T-shaped director, which is having the broad generalist, all the qualities that you were outlining, Marna, across. So to be able to have those in-depth conversations despite not necessarily having the deep knowledge of a topic, right, or a discussion point. But then also where your strengths lie in the T portion, you're really deep in what you do. So having that and kind of thinking that way, and again, we're talking to aspiring directors on how to be, packaging yourself as a viable board candidate. And you really need to check all those boxes. You need to be broad but deep. So just kind of putting that out there. I've just never forgotten that the way that was described, and I thought it was very apropos to kind of what
I would really agree with that because all the people that make the publicly traded board cut these days, I think, are fairly broad and competent, and they've all excelled. They haven't gotten there by not excelling in certain areas, and you want a diversity among those areas. But the concept of a specialist does worry me a bit.
No, I agree. Just as we were alluding to the technology aspects of this, I do want to kind of bring Ron back into the conversation. So Larissa, if you don't mind putting up our next slide, aligning skill with strategy. So we obviously asked a lot about skills and acumen that would be most critical for the evolution, and respondents rated digital technology and AI literacy as the top near-term capability most critical to the board in light of company strategic plans, and overwhelmingly 63%. And then shortly thereafter was strategy development from an innovative and disruptive mindset. So Ron, would you agree that in addition to being financially literate, a director today needs digital literacy as well?
Well, I would agree with that. And also picking up on Emily's and Marna's comments, the question is, how do you build that capability into the board? Because I don't think what you want, nor would you expect to have every director looking exactly alike when it comes to this digital literacy. So I think the question really is the board digitally literate? And I think that one of the challenges now, and we've seen this before, is, I mean, if some of us are old enough to remember when there wasn't an internet, right? If you think about each one of these waves, there's been we got to get that expert onto the board to help us move forward. And if you look at some of the success cases and some of the failure cases, I mean, yes, you do need to float the skills of the board up, and yes, the right board member who's got that T shape and also who understands that their role is not to be the smartest person in the room sitting in a corner waiting to be consulted, but has actually got an obligation to lift the board up. And you also need to be focused on what do you need from management in all this? because part of it is need to understand what management strategy is and what their kind of digital technology and their digital strategy is. But then remember, so much of what we as board members do are drawn from what we get from management, not just the backwards looking reporting, but also some of the forward looking risk management. So it goes back to what I said earlier. This is really about a system and what's the system to build that digital literacy. I do have some concern and it happens in our own board, the discussion in our own board, where I mean we're always refreshing, but the comments, you'll get this comment around an expert in the technology, but technology is ubiquitous, right? You've got it right here on your phone. And the pace at which the technology is being rolled out and the pace at which it's being improved, I don't think the differentiating factor is going to be understanding the technology. It's really understanding what you allude to in that prior slide. How does this technology, when applied to the strategy of the firm, going to actually vault the firm forward? And as importantly, with the power of this technology, what does transformation really mean? What is different about this technology than prior technologies is that the potential scope of change is enormous. I mean, there's things that the modern corporation has had as a truism for generations now, right? We're supposed to functionalize, to get efficient, right? We have specialty functions in there. Arguably, that's all going to get broken down in some way. And how do we as board members govern that? How do we, on the one hand, make sure that there are sufficient controls and that we've got the safeguards around it? On the other hand, how do we challenge management to say, well, okay, you've got all this power and potential through this technology. How are you using it? And are you using it as rapidly and deeply as your competitors, or are you going to be left behind? So I think you're asking absolutely the right question, Amy, around digital literacy. And I think it is, it should be measured at the board level. And when you put it all together, yeah, there's some expertise around the technology. There's some expertise around digital transformation. There's some expertise around what does it mean from a human resources perspective? How do we think about the challenge of retraining? How do we think about the impact on communities, et cetera? So to me, that's the challenge that these chairs of boards have, the heads of gov committees have, is how do I put together in a systemic way the correct board to help take us forward?
Yeah, I love that concept because I think there's so many aspects to this that's not just on, looking at, say, the technology debt of the company. It's really looking broadly across data, processes, and people, right? It's the three of those components and how you're attacking each one. And for the board to be truly literate, and I'll also dare say, God bless you, Emily, dare say relevant, right? It's very hard. You just held up your iPhone, and who knows, next month we might be carrying around like a micro dot thing that that everyone shifts to there. It's constantly evolving, so we have to constantly evolve with it. So literacy is relative, and I think that's an important concept. But I agree. I think you have to look at it not just the technology, but everything that's tied to what's happening in that space. So thank you for those thoughts, and maybe just a little more, Ron, from perspective of what this looks like in the actual boardroom. So, for example, what artifacts or routines demonstrate that a board is governing AI and digital transformation rather than just hearing updates from management or advisors?
Yeah, this gets back to one of your themes was around board processes. And I think this idea of how do you, as you're building the capabilities in the board, also make sure that board processes are sufficiently updated and aligned with what we're trying to do here. I mean, from our own perspective, we're big believers in dashboards, kind of indicators of progress or kind of where we are at any given point. We have this idea of the board dashboard, which is, if it's one thing that you can look at, fortunately, dashboards on most cars are digital, so then what's the next click down on it? But it's this idea, firstly, of a dashboard would be one of those things. Secondly is I think this puts a huge onus on the risk committees and boards because it's really hard to say, for example, to the audit committee, go audit AI and digital transformation. Well, auditors typically have to start with something to compare it to, and in many of these situations there is no comparison. So how do we augment both the risk capabilities of the board, but how it's being supplemented by the risk departments or the chief risk officers at the firms themselves to help to provide the information there. And then thirdly, I think how you think about the actual training of the board. I mean, in our situation, normally you don't drag the board through all the training that you're dragging management through. But we came to the conclusion that in our own digital transformation journey, that we actually needed to probably do the same thing with the board. Now it's been a little bit tailored. We're here in Boston, so we're working with MIT, but there's lots of different entities that one could work with. But in fact, our board's going through the very same training that 500 managers went through. I guess they start Wednesday night and all day Thursday. So I wouldn't underestimate the importance of that, because it goes back to the point of the T-shaped director. This is a time where we have to probably, to maybe push the analogy, spread the T's on some of these directors, because this is all uncharted territory for all of us.
Yeah, no, thank you for those thoughts. And yeah, I agree wholeheartedly on continuing education. I guess came back from 2 weeks of doing multiple presentations to different board groups around the country. And it was just the leaned in dialogue that's happening around this space in particular is really incredible. And everyone, I will say very generally, everyone is at a different pace and struggling to understand, what Gemini and Claude Pro and Claude Code and everything else. And what do I use? What do I use it for? What's a better platform? How am I, am I prompting correctly? All of the things that I would dare say my 13-year-old is probably very proficient at, that I need to work much harder at, right? So, because I'm not a digital native like my children. And, my 27-year-old or almost 27-year-old is at a different skill set than I am. So I think especially as you think about the more senior and experienced folks that sit on the boards, we have some catching up to do with the younger generations, for those that are not technology natives. And I think it's something that you want to put yourself in the best position. And it also helps in everything else you're doing, by the way, as well. So I think that's a really important aspect to that. And I'm a huge believer in continuing education for everyone. But I do like the point you make, Ron, in terms of understanding too what the organization is learning, and not necessarily having to do that same level, but being aware of how are we developing our folks to handle the transformation, who are our enablers in the company, and how are we rewarding them to kind of help carry this forward and get everybody on the bus. I welcome others' thoughts on this topic, because I know it's probably a hot topic for everybody in their boardrooms.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that we did, which was very valuable for concretizing it for board members, was to spend half a day with 5 different teams in the organization in very different areas. And they showed us the old process, what they had done with AI, where they were now, and where they were going. And it really brought the power, the leverage, home to the board members in terms of how we were implementing it.
No, that's
that.
great. Yeah, I think in this space, seeing is believing for a lot of folks, that they might not be as innovative as others, and really seeing how people are utilizing the capabilities that are at their fingertips has been really, I think, exciting as a, just to be a fly on that wall in different boards and with management teams. Emily, did you have something you wanted to
I
add?
was just going to say, I love the idea that Marna brought up, and we on some of my boards we have asked for demos. I think demos are the big thing. What does this look like? Because that's when people's minds can explode, and what we need them to do is to explode with not just the anxiety but the possibilities as well, and that makes for much more constructive conversations. Some years ago, when it was all about the cloud, I do remember a board conversation where someone said that the board needs to get up to speed on the cloud, and there was some grumpiness about that. I don't want to learn about the cloud. But I don't think anybody in any of my current board conversations is fighting learning about this. I think the immediacy, the speed, and the magnitude of what we're seeing has opened people's willingness to learn. So it's a good moment.
Yeah, good to hear. Good to hear on that one. So maybe if Larissa, if you want to put up the next slide on director refreshment, and we'll kind of close out the refreshment credibility gap here. So the survey highlights that board refreshment is not proactive for about 40% of respondents' boards, even though many believe significant changes are needed soon. And for example, 45% say in the next 1 to 3 years. So Emily, what specific mechanism would you say has been most effective on your boards to turn "we should refresh" into actual seat change? And what should directors stop doing potentially because it delays refreshment?
I got one for you. Well, you mentioned a couple of tools, and I think there really is a good tool set to help with board refreshment. That is declassification, term limits, tenure, a lot of those tools. I have to say, you can't assume that they work for every board, because in one of my boards, we're not declassified, and we have looked at that periodically to say we could gain some benefits from moving to a declassified structure. But in the end, we made the decision that it was more strategic and more critical for the company and for the board to stay classified. So not every tool is going to work for every company. I think the most important tool is one that we overlook quite a bit. I see it happen all the time. We talk a lot in the boardroom about how we have to be willing to have candid conversations with management. We have to be able to talk tough to management. But I don't think I hear very often the people acknowledge that we have to talk tough to each other, that we have to be willing to have the tough conversations with each other. And I think no matter what tools you use, term limits or whatnot, eventually somebody has to have a tough conversation and say, Emily, you've been amazing, and we need some different things, and we would like to reallocate this seat on the board to a different set of skills. And we would love to find a way to make that work for you and to thank you for your service. Those aren't fun conversations, but I think they're part of the job. Whether it's the head of N&G or the chair or the lead director. And I have seen people sort of slip away from those opportunities, and then what we do is we inherit somebody's renewed term again, and we miss an opportunity to bring some fresh talent on. So I think you said, what should directors stop doing? I think, and I have to say I'm somewhat guilty of this, we have to not allow directors to be in charge of the decision about their renomination. We have to not say, hey, it's time for everybody to raise their hand and say, we're getting ready for the annual meeting and the proxy. Are you signing up for another term? I don't think that the directors individually, I should not have the right to say that. The conversation should be one that says, we would like you. We have looked at what we need over the next term, and we would like you to stay on. Right? It should be reframed as a decision that's owned by board leadership and not by the independent board members themselves. And I am the pot calling the kettle black in this case, but I think at the end of the day, that's a dangerous framework that people, and that's why people sit on boards indefinitely, because hey, it's fun, it's interesting work. You get a steak dinner every 3 months, and why not stay on it? But I think the need to refresh and the need to constantly turn over the skill set should be owned by board leadership in a way that doesn't let people make that decision for themselves.
Good. Ron, Marna, I welcome your thoughts in this area.
I'll give you an example of what I've done in a not-for-profit setting and a little bit about a for-profit. I think that's harder. But in a not-for-profit setting at Salk Institute, we have a board, and as you know, basic science research today is very hard and funding is tough. But we've taken the philosophy that we're not going to use tenure or age as a crutch. We're going to make sure everybody earns their place at the table every time their term is up. Now, the terms are 3 years. So we're clear about the expectations from the beginning. And obviously, they're the standard old expectations: time, talent, and treasure. But we keep a report card on each of our trustees. And at the end of their 3-year term, we sit down with them with our perception of their contributions to the board. So for the last 3 years, it has the attendance at board meetings, what percent, attendance at committee meetings. So are they at least there? Then we have talent. What have they contributed? Are they chairman of the investment committee? Have they led the big fundraiser? And in terms of treasure, we look at, are they an annual giving member, a contributor every year? What capital projects have they been committed to moving forward? And we take it, we sit down with them, and some of them are no-brainers. I mean, they've been all in. But one of them I did last year, I said, Salk needs somebody that has more time and treasure sitting in this seat. If you see yourself becoming this person in another term, that would be wonderful. But if not, we would think that this is not the right time in your life to be a Salk trustee. We'd love to have you come back when you want to be committed. But maybe you need to take a time out.
Nice, beautifully phrased.
Yeah.
I see
And-
Ron smiling too. That was elegant.
It works. It works. And actually, I hope this person isn't related. I had one of those at a different institution I did, and it was a Goldman Sachs partner that I was talking to. And she said to me, "This is the nicest way I've been fired in my entire life." But I think it's true for for-profit boards too. And I have been associated with one for-profit board, Phillips 66, where we've totally refreshed the board now. Nobody's ever been refreshed based on tenure or age. In fact, we don't have any of those limits. It's entirely on the skill matrix matched up to the strategic plan. Some people have given us all they can give us and have been good board members, but have really contributed all they could contribute. They've now been retired 10 or 11 years. They're less connected. They're less a specialist in their area than there were. And you have the honest conversation, because this isn't about the person, it's about the company. And with the complexity you cited at the beginning, with the need for transformation, with the increasing accountability, we can't expand. The not-for-profit world expands our boards to raise more money. We can't do that. There's a size. We all have our opinion. Is it 10 to 12, but it's not 16 or 17 that can sit around that table and have the honest conversation you talked about, Emily. So we just have to do it.
Yeah.
And it comes back, Ron, to your opening comments about what is the board for?
Yeah, I think your point on kind of the skill sets that you need today aren't the same as, your leadership or management roles a decade ago, right? Sometimes it's the board members that are keeping themselves relevant in those seats that are the ones that are having the longer tenure, because they are still contributing to the organization and to what they're going through. But we see a lot of that too, and I just maybe a slight differential on a theme, but there's an awful lot of boards that are highly functioning boards, extremely collaborative, have done a great job. And some of them, just dare I say, start to get a little bit complacent in their role, and maybe aren't as, they have a lot of trust in management. They have a lot of trust in their other board members, but may not be thinking for that next disruptive event that's going to upend their strategy. So that's always something to kind of I keep in the back of my mind when I go into a boardroom and I see it very highly functioning. Is this as it seems, or is there something that could actually help this board? So just
Well, you said at the beginning, it's not just highly functioning, but it has to be fit for the future.
Right.
And
Right.
they're not exactly the same.
Yeah.
exactly. All right. Well, I'm gonna move us forward to the next section here on board structure. So Larissa, if you don't mind putting up the changes slide. And this one's a little bit busier, so I apologize if it's a little small, but we will be passing out the slides after the program. So just so you're all aware. And maybe Amarna, I'll stick with you on this. And there's a lot of questions on both of, we put two slides up at the same time. So just wanted to call your attention to that. So which of the following structural changes have your boards recently implemented? Select all that apply. And then which of the following structural changes would you consider implementing on your boards, and select up to 2. So they're kind of stretched out across the slide. But Marna, maybe talking about full board versus committees. We have nearly 49% of directors reporting that they're requiring pervasive issues to be addressed by the full board in order to reduce committee strain. So we talked a lot about what the audit committee seems to get handed to for many boards. But where do you see, if you've made that shift, what did you change from maybe agenda designs, pre-reads, other things like that, so that full board ownership didn't devolve into a high-level conversation with no follow-through?
Well, I think I may be a bit of a contrarian here also because I think the full board should set the strategy together as a group with management. They should oversee the execution of the strategy and public policy. But I think the work of the board needs to be done in committees. If you put it into the full board, it's really hard to get the time and the depth of thinking and expertise you need. And so the committee should do the work. And to make this effective, they need clear charters. They need to be able to schedule committee meetings, as many and as long as they need to have between meetings if possible. They need to be able to hire the expertise they need to have. I think all the board members should see the materials. It's supplemental reading for some, but all board members govern the whole operations of the entity, but they have to delegate some of the oversight to fellow board members. And I think key to that is trust. Trust that the committees are all led by very capable committee chairmen who are committed to the work, understand the full charters, company liaisons that are very forward-looking, help to set the agendas, good working management relationship. And I think if this doesn't work, if you can't get the work done in a committee that you need to get done, you may need another committee, but I don't think you should devolve it to the board. I don't think that's the solution. And if that happens, I think maybe the board may need to step back and look at the level on which it's operating. Is it really operating at a board level, or is it trying to get into things that a capable management team should be doing?
Right.
Are there points though, Marna, when you think about how things are being allocated to committee, and I'll be maybe a little more specific around some of the things that we've been seeing. I know, Emily, you were just saying you worked on, hiring or identifying a sustainability director with good experience. Things like sustainability, ESG, and now with technology and cyber, it seems like they're cutting across multiple committees of the board in various ways. I mean, if you think about some of the need to demonstrate the ROI for AI, for example, what does that look like? how are you holding, dealing with maybe risk and disclosure in the audit committee side of the house, but how in other maybe committees of the board, like the comp committee, are you dealing with the accountability piece or holding folks accountability for the money being spent on projects and where those are going? And if you're building in the room to fail, because not all of these projects exceed expectations. Some, just get left on the drafting table, right? And there's only a limited amount of resources you can apply. So how are you, I guess, thinking about that in terms of incentivizing management to lean into this? So to me, it's complicated there.
That's a whole host
Yeah.
of questions, I think, with lots of ways to attack it. I'll
Yeah.
give you some examples of the way I've seen it attacked. For the audit committee, when we were educating ourselves, first we had our external auditor come in and do 2 education systems in AI. We did it virtually at a time that we invited the whole board to join us if they chose to.
Yeah.
On capital projects, we have a mandatory look back on every capital project. What was the original performance expected? How did it perform? What are the variances? What did we learn? What are we changing going forward? I mean, I think there's, and in terms of human capital, I was chair of the Human Resource and Comp Committee, and I had a partner that was charge of Nom and Gov. And the way the charters were set up, Nom and Gov did CEO succession. HRCC did the executive leadership team and the succession and talent development 2 levels down in the organization. But I invited the Nom and Gov committee to my October meeting where they could see the total talent review and the development plans. And Nom and Gov invited the HRCC to the December meeting where we did CEO succession. So, I mean, there's, as I think somebody said at the beginning, we silo these functions in some way, but they're not truly siloed. As you just said, Amy, a lot of things cut across the organization. So I think we have to be flexible in how we look at things, and what areas need more sharing and less sharing. And somebody can always raise their hand and say, I want to come to your committee meeting. Now, there's complexities and timing on that when you have a committee day attached to a board, but there are lots of ways of addressing it. And I think trust is really important. We're all in this together, and I think being honest with one another about what we need to do together. And that comes out in the strategy session a lot. In the strategy session, we often get area that we spend 3 days once a year, set strategy. We talk about strategy every meeting, but in the strategy session, we come up, where do we want continuing education? And sometimes it's around the street and how the street looks at us. Sometimes it's around competitor strategy. Sometimes it's around the technology developments in the business of the business.
Great, thank you.
I like to.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
was going to add to that. I like what Marna said, and we've been talking a lot about the T model for directors. I want to talk about the T model for topics, because one of the things I think I've seen is that certain topics like ESG or risk management in general, that lends itself to a T treatment as well. There's the horizontal, the top level pieces for the board. And then at the committee level, we go deeper. We work more directly with management. We help them set metrics or review a little bit lower down. And I think that's a nice way for somebody who's only interested in it or at the top level, that's fine. But if you want to see what Nom and Gov is really doing with the ESG team, come to our meeting and you can be involved. I also think constantly being willing to rebalance the committee work is important. And I think in my own N&G committees, we look at the charters periodically and say, are we asking too much? And is there a way that we can move the work around a little bit? I mean, you don't want to be doing that all the time because you lose people's context. But I do think it doesn't have to live one place forever and all time, right?
Likewise, committee members don't.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
You rotate committee members so they get a good view of the whole organization.
More experience. Yeah, totally.
Good point. All right, I'm going to wrap up this section with Ron and Larissa, if you can advance to the next slide. Just thinking about the oversight model for systemic risk, with the top oversight priorities being long-term strategy and resilience, 68%, and technology adoption and digital transformation, 67%. How have you structured information flow within your boards so that the board can detect weak signals early, such as geopolitical issues, cyber, labor disruptions, what have you, and be able to act between meetings? I guess, what is one governance muscle you would recommend that every board build and exercise regularly?
So, Amy, I'll come to this, but I just wanted to add in that
Oh,
from that
sure.
conversation, though, the other tool that I've seen used productively is to, we demand that management be agile and to form agile working groups. The boards can do the same thing. And you may decide that we don't necessarily want to have a committee, but we need a group of people that are going to spend some time on this and then inform the rest of the board. So standing groups, task forces are also tools that I've seen used quite productively. But on this question of information flow, it's a really good point because boards, I mean, information is the oxygen around which boards live. I talked earlier about dashboards, and we're big users of them. There's an overall strategy dashboard that I publish quarterly for the board. And they challenge that. They'll challenge kind of, because obviously it's management self-assessing itself here on agreed upon milestones and priority areas, but that's one. But then in each of the core areas of the business, we have similar, what we call sub-dashboards. The C-level reports are really important here. By that, I mean the chief risk officer, the chief financial officer, the chief HR officer. Those reports, which I urge each of them to don't repeat what's already in some report that the risk committee is going to be looking at, or in our case, we have a technology and operations committee, but just, when you synthesize it all, what boards really want to hear from these C-level people is what's on your mind. What are you worried about? What are you happy about? What are you looking forward to? What are you dreading? The third kind of thing that we find to be quite useful here is not so much the backwards looking reports, which are quite important, but how we're looking at the world, in this case, the chief risk officer, how he or she is looking at the world. This has become obviously very important for us around AI. And we spent the first year, the kind of late 23, early 24, on AI, doing nothing other than trying to come up with our own risk framework. How were we going to deal with this? Because for us, it's we saw the power in it, but we also realized that we also have a lot of client data, an awful lot of client data, and not to reduce it just to one thing, but how are we going to manage and prevent the escaping of that client information out into the wild there? So it's this idea of how do you think about, in a forward-looking way, what you want to do. So those kinds of reports are actually quite good. We communicate a lot to our board. There's in a non-board month, there'll be something that goes out to them, a publication that's typically it's a compilation of things. It could be analyst reports, interesting media, simply things that other board members thought, I'd like the board to see this and have this. Some of these board technology platforms like Diligent are really helpful on that. If it's a month where there's not a board meeting, I and the lead director will host typically an hour and a half kind of thing. It'll be just to catch them up. So it's maybe a half hour of me speaking and then up to another hour of just Q&A or discussion amongst each other. Sometimes I'll get something from a board member that they'll say, gee, I saw this. Could we at that next thing have could we have a discussion on that? I do find that that is, you don't want to have too many meetings, but when you get a month or two from the last meeting, I mean, memories are short. Or there's a little bit of, gee, if I'm not hearing about it, nothing must be happening. And boards often fall into that trap. So it's useful just to keep the board refreshed on what's going on. Our lead, a third tool is the lead director. So she, in this case, she is constantly kind of in communication with directors, sometimes initiated by a director. A director knows that they can call her at any point on anything. And that's actually useful because it helps in the agenda setting. I set the agenda together with the lead director, and it's really helpful to understand what she's hearing from directors. I mean, I have those same kind of conversations, but the director to lead director, as opposed to the combined CEO chair, I think is very effective. And then, like I said, these informational meetings we will do when there's issues that arise that are non-normal, right? So, the tariffs back in April and what we thought that was going to do to markets, the Iran war. And we have a very big business in the Gulf states. We'll just pretty quickly do an informational meeting and bring in a group of people to just talk about what we're hearing. I mean, what the board is most concerned about is, operationally, are we okay? But then from there, it typically goes beyond that in terms of just having an interchange on the issue at that moment. And I actually find it, from a management perspective, I find that actually quite useful because in many cases, these board members are on other boards. They've got their own kind of information sources. Management thinks that it's all seeing and all knowing, but actually board members have perspectives that they're bringing or just information channels that we wouldn't have. So those are absolutely two-way kinds of things. And then finally, in some cases, it would be around in regulated industries. It's really helpful to occasionally bring in regulators and to get their perspective. I mean, oftentimes there can be a frustration with regulators. It feels like the management and the regulated company is actually ahead of the regulator, but it's still helpful to get their perspective and also to share it back to the regulator. Most good regulators actually want to hear from management, and they welcome the opportunity to occasionally talk to the board.
Yep. Emily, Marna, anything further before we get into our kind of last section here?
I think
No, I'm good.
I think Ron covered the waterfront there very well.
All right.
I agree.
All right, Larissa, next slide, please. And this is kind of where we're going to hone in a little bit further on governance processes. So maybe we'll start with kind of the agenda reality check. So the survey suggests boards are prioritizing strategy and resilience, 68%. And did I cover this already? No. Sorry, similar feedback. And tech transformation, 67%. Yet many directors still experience governance drag from compliance and backward-looking reporting, as Ron mentioned previously. So, Emily, what one agenda meeting process change? Could it be a standing item, a consent decision, has most improved your board's ability to govern the future?
I think it's cleaning the closets. I think it's recognizing that just because it was important or it has been important, it's not necessarily going to be important. Everything can't always be important. I was in a famous management meeting years ago when somebody put up a slide and they colored the parts of the globe that were priorities for their marketing team, and everything was colored A. And the CEO said, well, they can't all be A. right? And the whole world can't be your A priority. What's B and what's C? So I think as new things come up, we have to be willing to ask ourselves what other things go down. It isn't supplementing, it's supplanting. And so cleaning out the closet to me is looking at the agenda and going, okay, yeah, we always started this committee meeting with this topic, but we've all agreed in the last quarter that this other new thing is critical. So can we suppress this? Can we move it to the appendix? Can we move it to an annual update versus a quarterly update? Can we move it to one slide versus five? Because you can't make room for criticality unless you're willing to deprioritize things. So I think that it's easier said than done because everybody's got their favorite slides in the deck and, oh no, we have to have that. But I think being willing to invite management, as we do on one of our boards, to look at the deck periodically and say, we don't want to prepare this anymore. We don't think it's not useful to us in running the business. So if you think it's really important to see at the board level, maybe we need to talk about that. I think, being willing to revisit the sort of standard stuff so that you make room, to me, that's key.
I would just say, just to build on that a little bit in a different way, working really hard continuously to put things that you have to opine on into consent agendas and to have supplementary materials, which are pre-reads, and to keep working at clearing out the PowerPoint so that you have the conversations.
Right.
It's
Right.
really the conversations that are so important. And one of the things we do on one of my boards, the first hour of every board meeting, is just the board and the CEO, and we just talk about what's on his mind and what's on the board's mind, what they've seen in the pre-read they don't understand, or they're worried about, or they're thinking about, or they saw on another board, or they heard from somebody. And really making the room for conversation.
What I would add to this, I agree with both Emily and Marna, and I think Emily's your point about kind of weeding the garden on a continuous basis is actually really important. I think that gets enabled if there's trust between management and the board. And I've always said to my team, it's our job to earn trust, and it's the board's job to bestow trust. And I've always said to our board that that I will absolutely bring something to you that I think needs to be brought to you. If I don't, either I judged wrong or I was just as surprised as you were. And I think being able to have that trust-based relationship between management and the board enables you to do the kinds of things that both Marna and Emily are talking about, which is, the job of a particular public company board director is really hard now. And it's very easy to practice what I call defensive boards, right? Where you shovel everything into the materials. Management can say, well, it was there. And boards can say, well, it was there. And it's almost kind of from trying to avoid litigation or whatever, but it makes for a clunky board and a board that's really mired in a lot of stuff and may say that it wants to spend time on those three things that everybody talked about as being so important: strategy, talent, digital technology transformation. But if you've got all this other stuff clogging the system, so it's a combination of trust, being willing to say, I trust you that we don't need that any longer, and that if we do need it, you're going to bring it back. And if we need to bring it back, we do bring it back.
Right.
Right. All right. Couple of final questions before we part ways here. But Larissa, on the next slide, we're talking about the evaluation process, and I'm going to go back to you, Emily, around this. And nearly half of our participants in the survey rated their board evaluations as only somewhat effective, 47%. at
Yeah.
identifying improvement opportunities. And the survey also notes that the director interviews are viewed as highly effective, yet they're not universally used. So, what have
Mhm.
your boards done to ensure that evaluations drive consequences and follow through, whether that's through refreshment decisions, committee changes, individual development plans? And what would you advise boards to do differently in the next 90 days?
I think what we have done is constantly engage with the process of the evaluation. I think an old process, when I first took over my first Nom and Gov committee, it was here's the interview form we use, and the chair's admin sends it out, and everybody fills it out and collects it, and then it's done. Check, right? And I think if you don't evaluate the evaluations, you're not really asking yourselves, what questions are we asking? And what is it that we really want to know about our own performance? Have we asked ourselves if we're doing the things that are in our charter? Have we asked ourselves how we're engaging as a board? So I think committing to spend time before you issue the evaluations to say, what do we want to know this year? Right? Because it can be a burden at the end of the year. Everybody's looking at budget documents and God knows what else. And all of a sudden, here's this giant survey you have to fill out. Okay, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, right? So trying to minimize it, keep it at the right altitude, freshen it, make sure the questions are aligned with the things that are going on. I think that's maybe the most important thing you could do in the next 90 days if you haven't done your annual evaluation yet. I think one thing that has worked well in one of my boards is we've actually written out the process. So there's an actual document that says we evaluate the full board every year. We evaluate individual directors every other year. Every 3 years, we bring in an independent consultant to help us with those conversations. When the evaluations come back, then the chair of Nom and Gov or the chair of the board goes back and has one-on-one conversations. I mean, we apply a discipline to it the same way you would apply a discipline to anything else. So I think that for me, the bottom line, it has to be thoughtful and it has to be meaningful to the person who's conducting it. And I take those things seriously. I don't like it when they don't go well, and I like them to get better. The other thing that I think has been impactful for me in one of my boards, we had some difficulty on this board where we weren't getting along and we weren't aligned, and there was a lot of disagreement around strategy. And that disagreement around strategy is fine, but in this particular case, it took an ugly turn. And we backed up and developed something that we call our operating principles. We actually wrote down what do we want to do as a board and how do we want to behave, and what do we want to bring to the board? What do we think is table stakes for the way we interact with each other? How do we want to face decisions? What decisions do we and don't we want to make? And that was extremely painful, but we ended up with a very succinct 2-page document, and we put that at the front of every board deck. And at the beginning of every board meeting now, we ask ourselves, how are we doing against our own operating principles? And I have a hope that one day we're going to say we don't need that anymore. We've risen above that. It's a temporary fix to try to get everybody's chin up to the right altitude. But that's been a useful tool in companionship with the evaluations, because now the evaluations can say, how well are we doing against our operating principles? So there's a closed loop. And I think that's the bottom line. It just, as a manager, you can't just tell somebody to get better and then sit back and wait for it to happen. You have to pay attention and care and say, hey, I see you're doing better. Hey, how's this going? We have to audit our own improvement. The things that we identify as improvement opportunities, either individually or collectively, have to be audited. And so again, I think that's the chair of Nom and Gov and the chair of the board or the lead independent have to share some responsibility to follow through on those.
And Marta, anything to add here about how you view the board and director evaluation process and how you think it might need to evolve?
Well, I would just add a little bit, and that is one of the things that's I've seen work very well on one of my boards is we have our questionnaires and our open format questions, but 3 times a year, our CEO flies out and has lunch with each of the directors one-on-one and gets their feedback. They have honest conversations. And then at the end of the year, the lead director calls each of our directors. So when you cross-reference what's said in the surveys and the open response answers what the CEO has heard from each of the directors about what they're concerned about, and that's a time that they can talk about their fellow directors without feeling exposed. And with the lead director, and the lead director and the CEO don't always necessarily have a fully aligned view of the value of some of the directors. So you put that combination together, you bring it into a very small, discrete nom and gov committee, and you can make some really good decisions about how directors perceive their own performance, how other directors perceive their performance, and where there are opportunities to upgrade the board.
I'm going to take that one away. I like that one. What I would add, going back to the evaluation process, is that I would agree with what Emily said. The forms by themselves, even the best constructed ones, are not very useful. And a very, very effective practice I've seen is that the form goes out, it's completed, and then the chair of NomGov does one-on-ones with each of the directors and does a couple things. One, to really understand their answers. And it almost, when you know that's going to happen, it forces you from giving straight tens to everything, because
Right.
it'll look like what it was. You just did 10, 10, 10, 10, 10.
Yeah.
Also, that in this particular instance, the chair does ask for feedback on other directors, and is worded in a very nice way. Are there things that you've seen amongst fellow directors that you want him or her to keep doing? Have you seen things amongst fellow directors that you want them to stop doing? And have you seen things that you want them to start doing? Right. So it's the keep, stop, start, which is a lot less threatening than is X worthless, right? But that then is compiled, and then it is in this case, the chair of the board that goes back and does those year-end discussions. Because it goes back to what I was saying earlier. This is all about a system, and to do the kind of refreshment that both Marna and Emily were talking about, you kind of need the fuel for it. And I think this evaluation is actually quite important. These are small groups of people. Most of their work actually does occur in the groups of 10 or 12, however many directors there are. And so they really know each other. That becomes a problem because it's only 10 or 12, and you don't want to, you really do like Joe, or you really do like Sally.
Right.
But it was the point that, Emily, I think it's what you made earlier. These aren't tenured positions. And the fact that it's your time has nothing to do with that you weren't an effective director. It's just that the time has come.
Yeah, no, well said. I love that. I love both of those ideas. And I think it's something that I think more, I dare say, forward-thinking directors, they want to know. They want to know how their performance is being perceived by their fellow directors. They want to know how to strengthen what they're doing. And sometimes they're not aware of what they might have a negative effect on others in the boardroom. And it's probably a good thing to air that out and kind of nip that behavior in the bud, right?
I do also believe that age limits and term limits actually become crutches and prevent this kind of stuff. And it's a little bit like if you take those training wheels away, you're going to be forced to adopt these kinds of things. Because otherwise it's, Joe's 73. We only got 2 years to go, right? I mean, That's not how it ought to be.
Right. Well, and I think you said it earlier, Emily. I just want to reiterate is the point on how you onboard your directors in terms of setting expectations from day one, or even in the interview process. Like, if you're thinking this is going to be a 20-year stint, just let's let's nip that in the bud, because unless it could very well maybe, but you have to earn that.
Well, Marna said, "Earn your term." I wrote that down. I'm
earn your
taking
term.
that.
Yes,
Yeah,
I like
earn your
it.
term,
We have a lot of. I'm going to have to go back and listen for all
I've
the
got several. Yeah.
things. Yes, I was writing before and I couldn't get off mute because I was typing. I was taking notes. Anyway, no, don't worry. No attribution will be shared. But one of the things, Ron, I wanted to follow on to you is who gets input, or I'm sorry, whose input gets airtime beyond shareholders. So we deal with a lot of stakeholders in business. So respondents lean toward moderate engagement with stakeholders beyond shareholders, and that was about 46.4% of the time. And they favored practical mechanisms such as management-led stakeholder briefings for 53%, board roundtables 44.5%, and stakeholder surveys about 36%. So I guess what's worked on your boards to hear and gather stakeholder perspectives without blurring governance versus management? And maybe if you can share an example of where stakeholder input changed a board decision.
So with our board, we do the two additional key, well, there's three, but let me talk about two. The one is employees, second is our clients. So we do a fair number of employee roundtables. We try and do them in a way where there's some intimacy to them. So for example, once a year, we'll take the board offsite, typically out of the country, and we'll make sure that we've done sometimes more than one kind of employee roundtable. So it won't be all 10 independent directors. It might be 2 or 3 groups of 4 and 5 directors. Those are really effective. Employees are remarkably candid and open, even across cultures. So that's quite important. Similarly, we try and do client kind of panels when we do those kinds of things. So we'll be off-site, or we'll even here when we have the board meeting in Boston 1 or 2 times a year, we'll have clients come in and just give feedback, and that's really, really helpful, both positive and negative. I think it's helpful for the board to hear both. And we choose clients to make sure that there's going to be some candor to all this. So that's useful. I talked earlier about regulators. I mean, we're a highly regulated industry, so there's a fair amount of interaction with regulators too. With our lead regulator, which should be the Fed, I mean, that happens pretty frequently. They'll come and speak to the board, and it's the same for all of the large banks. They'll come 3 or 4 times a year and spend an hour with the board. But I like to get some of the non-US regulators too, because they're also important. So we'll periodically do that. And it's good for both sides to hear the perspectives of each other. And we try and make those two-way, not just one-way.
No, excellent, excellent. Well, I'm very cognizant of the time, and I would like to maybe end our discussion today with a quick lightning round and ask each of you, what 1 to 2 actions would you recommend our employees pledge, or excuse me, our attendees pledge to bring to their boards to drive future effectiveness as they leave here today? And Marna, I'll start with you.
I would say you need to make sure your organization has every seat at the board table filled by somebody that's committed and contributing, with clear expectations and clear feedback on their performance. And I say this with a belief that both continuity and change are important in the boardroom. And the second thing I'd say is hopefully you build a learning board, because it is a very dynamic world that we live in, and commitment to continuing education for your board, either supporting it individually or facilitating it as a group, but you really want to have a board that's committed to growing and learning in their capability.
Great. Emily?
They are our human capital too.
Yes, for sure.
That's a lot of things there, Marna. That's a lot of things, not one thing, but that's a lot. Those are all good things. I would say if it's one thing, I would say, what are the conversations that we're not having that we should have? Because I think at every board, at least in my experience, as good as they can be, there are a couple of topics that we don't go there. we don't go there. And is that really the right way to be, given the expectations and the change that are being thrust upon us? I think, how do we get those conversations that have been off the table back onto the table? And how do we make sure that we're having a level of candor among us that is deserving of the company's respect of the board, the same way we ask the company to accept candor and feedback from us?
Great. Thank you. And Ron, bring us
Oh,
home.
two things. One is give the board some unstructured time with the CEO. And this goes back to the trust point earlier. There has to be trust going both ways. You don't want the CEO to feel like, uh-oh, this is going to be just one gotcha session. I have no idea what's going to come out. And if it turns into that, it won't work. But I always find that I get the most positive feedback on how did an XYZ board meeting go when we've got that time, right? It could be, we always do the hour at the beginning that one of you mentioned before. But even there, at least in my mind, I'm trying to get through an awful lot in an hour, so it feels structured, even though it isn't. Sometimes it's just a dinner where we say, management's not going to be there. It's just going to be, the board and the CEO, and just have that free flow conversation. So that would be one. Secondly, is we talked at the very beginning about this, the role of the specialist versus the role of the generalist. I wouldn't give up on the generalists. I mean, boards composed of highly qualified executives that served in these important roles. They didn't get less good. It comes down to ongoing education. So, how do you think thoughtfully about more education? It does come down to board members being willing to invest in themselves to do that too. But I find sometimes you'll see a board member and there's this refreshed energy or just real thoughtfulness around something. And I always, try and find out where'd that come from. And more often than not, they attended a program. In some cases, they've just taken an online course. And so encouraging that in board members to kind of continue this T that we've talked about. I mean, the crosses are as important as the downs in that.
Right. Well, thank you all for sharing your wisdom with us all today. And I really appreciate your time. And I'm going to turn it back to NACD to wrap us up.
You're on mute.
You muted, Diane.
Sorry about that. I'm sitting here making notes just from that last 5 minutes. That was so valuable. So, thank you. Thank you, all of you, for attending today, and many thanks to Amy, Ron, Marna, and Emily. I've got a few quick announcements before I let you on your way. First of all, in the beginning of this afternoon, the slide with the logos of our sponsors didn't show up, and so we wanted to post that again. We've got 20 or so logos on this slide that are really generous supporters of ours. If you are listening and you work for these firms, thank you for your commitment to NACD. Upcoming programs, our calendar's filling up. We hope you'll join us at one or more of our upcoming events. Please note an important save the date here on June 4th. We will have, see the bottom one, we have advanced topics for experienced public company directors, which will be held in Boston. I've been to that program before and I think it's fantastic. This is designed for directors currently sitting on public company boards. And finally, don't forget the survey. The link is in the chat. There's a QR code on your screen, but it'll also be in a follow-up email, which you will receive later today. Please take a moment to fill it out. The programming committee really values your input and uses it to shape future programs. So that's it. We look forward to seeing you at our next event, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.